Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely.
So it's this English learning podcast called Daily Money Briefing.
Huh. Interesting. Okay.
It's actually pretty cool. You get the
Yeah.
financial news and kind of a language lesson all in one.
Oh, I like that. Sort of killing two birds with one stone.
Exactly. We're digging into some really interesting material today, all centered on the global economy.
Yeah, some key shifts happening.
Exactly. We're looking at trade talks, some, frankly, surprising economic forecasts, and government stimulus plans,
A real mix.
right? Our mission here is to, cut through the complexity, pull out the essential insights, and give you a clear sense of what's really going on. Let's get into it. Okay, so first up, something happening, well, right now, basically, that is pretty critical. High-stakes diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like the U.S. and China are resuming their top-level trade negotiations in London today, June 9th.
And the people involved signal how serious this is.
Definitely. The list we have show Treasury Secretary Bessent, Commerce Secretary Lutnick, and USTR Greer for the U.S., meeting with China's Vice Premier, He Lifeng.
And it's key to remember this isn't, totally out of the blue. This follows that 90-day tariff truce they agreed back in Geneva on May 12th.
Right, there was that bit of breathing room. Markets seem to like that pause.
They did, yeah. A positive reaction initially. But the core problems, the really tough sticking points, they haven't gone away.
Still there.
Absolutely. The analysis keeps pointing to the same issues. Critical mineral exports, tech controls, semiconductors, AI tech, and the whole Taiwan situation.
Not easy fixes.
Not at all. These touch on deep national security stuff, strategic priorities. So the question really is, can they actually find some common ground this time? Investors are definitely watching this closely.
Yeah, you can see why. Any wobble there could mean volatility.
For sure.
Okay, and speaking of things impacting the economy, let's pivot to the U.S. picture, because the data includes a pretty stark forecast change.
Yeah, this is quite something. The OECD and others sharply cut their U.S. growth forecast for 2025.
Oh, sharp.
Pulled it way down from 2.8% growth down to just 1.6%.
Wow, okay. That's a big drop. What are they saying is behind that?
The main reason flagged by the OECD is these tariff-driven trade tensions. They see that as a major drag.
Huh. And does that fit with other numbers?
It does, actually. It lines up with other data mentioned, like S&P Global showing a rare real GDP contraction in Q1 of 2025.
A contraction. The economy actually shrank. How did that happen?
Well, it was partly these import-driven anticipatory behaviors.
Meaning?
Basically, businesses got nervous about future tariffs or supply chain problems from the trade tensions, so they rushed to import goods before things got worse.
Ah, okay. And high imports actually pull GDP down in the calculation for that quarter, right?
Exactly. It's a bit counterintuitive, but yeah. It shows how these trade fears can really warp activity, and then you've still got sticky inflation layered on top.
Still high.
Yeah, core PCE, for example, is still hovering around 3.6%, stubbornly high.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Growth forecasts are dropping, largely because of trade fears. The economy actually shrank in Q1, partly due to weird trade-related buying, and inflation is still too high.
That's the picture, yeah. The synthesis points towards rising risks of what some are calling tech-fueled stagflation.
Stagflation, slow growth, and high inflation.
Yeah, precisely. Slow or no growth, plus persistent inflation. The tech-fueled bit maybe suggests tech sector strength isn't lifting the whole boat. It puts the Fed in a really tough spot.
Balancing act. Cool inflation without killing growth entirely.
A very difficult one.
And for you, listening, this matters directly. It hits your finances, market stability, and it's what drives those Fed interest rate decisions down the line. Okay, but let's shift gears now. A very different story coming out of South Korea. More positive.
Yes, quite a contrast. Looking at South Korea, the outlook presented is actually brightening quite a bit. You've got major investment banks, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all upgrading Korea's 2025 GDP forecasts.
Upgrading. By how much?
The specifics mentioned are Barclays moving to 1.0%, Goldman and Morgan Stanley both going to 1.1%.
Okay, so what's making them more optimistic there?
The main reason cited across the board is the strong expectation of a second supplementary budget from the government there.
A big one?
Fiscal stimulus? Yeah, fiscal stimulus. We're talking around 20 trillion Korean won, specifically aimed at boosting the economy.
So direct government spending push.
Exactly. And what's interesting is these upgrades are happening even though there are still concerns about sluggish domestic demand and exports maybe not recovering as fast as hoped?
So the stimulus hopes are outweighing those concerns.
It seems so. The bet appears to be that rapid government spending, particularly on things like infrastructure, can kind of power through those weaknesses and keep growth stable. It's a deliberate fiscal choice.
That contrast is really striking, isn't it? You have the U.S., where trade tensions are seen as actively hurting the outlook, maybe creating stagflation risk, while South Korea is using domestic spending to try and boost its forecast, even with potential global trade headwinds maybe affecting its exports.
It really highlights the different tools governments are reaching for, diplomacy and trade negotiations on one side, monetary policy juggling acts, and then direct fiscal firepower on the other. Different responses to uncertainty.
So let's quickly wrap up what we've covered in this deep dive. We saw the U.S. and China back at the negotiating table over trade.
High stakes there.
Then the U.S. economic outlook looking more cautious, with those stagflation worries linked partly to trade friction and sticky inflation.
Tricky mix.
And then South Korea getting forecast upgrades, largely thanks to expectations of significant government stimulus.
It leaves you with a final thought, perhaps, based just on what we've seen today. Well, think about the different strategies. You've got trade talks, central bank balancing acts, direct government spending. Do these examples give you any sense of which tools might be maybe more effective depending on the type of economic challenge a country is facing right now?
That's a great question to ponder. Lots to think about regarding how these global events connect and shape different economic paths. That brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thanks for diving deep with us today.